In February of 1945, a canvas-covered army truck rolled through the red clay backroads of central Georgia, carrying 47 German women who believed they were being driven to a place where mercy ended. They were wrong. Elise Bauer sat on the wooden bench nearest the rear flap, both hands pressed over her stomach so the others would not hear it growl. She was 24 years old. Before the war, she had been a school clerk in Bremen. During the war, she had worn a gray auxiliary uniform, answered telephone lines, sorted messages, and repeated whatever the Reich told her to repeat. America was starving. America was weak. America hated prisoners. America had no discipline, no morals, and no food to spare. That last part mattered most to women who had forgotten what fullness felt like. Beside Elise, Marta Vogel held a cloth bundle in her lap as if it were a child. Inside were 2 letters, a cracked comb, and a photograph of her younger brother taken before his face became sharp from hunger. Across from them, Inge Weiss stared through a gap in the canvas, watching pine trees blur into flat winter fields. Nobody spoke much. Hunger had trained them out of unnecessary words. The truck slowed at a wire gate. An American flag moved in the cold wind above a wooden sign that read Camp Ridgeland. The women straightened without meaning to. Some crossed their arms over their chests. Some looked at the ground. Elise expected shouts. She expected rifle butts. She expected revenge. Instead, a young American lieutenant in a clean wool uniform stepped beside the truck and said, in careful German, "You will be processed first, then you will eat." Eat. The word moved through the truck like a match struck in a dark room. Her name was Lieutenant Margaret Collins, and she did not smile. But she did not sneer either. She held a clipboard, counted each woman by name, and nodded to the guards as if the Germans were not monsters or prizes, just prisoners. That was already confusing. The barracks were plain, wooden, drafty at the corners. But there were actual beds with folded blankets, wash basins with clean water, and a black iron stove in the center of the room already breathing heat. By then Elise had learned not to trust first impressions. A warm room could still become a cruel one. A polite officer could still become a liar. So when a corporal opened the door the next morning and said, "Breakfast in 15 minutes," Elise thought she had misunderstood. 15 minutes later, the 47 German women crossed the yard under a pale Georgia sun and walked into the mess hall. Elise stopped so suddenly Marta nearly stepped on her heel. On the metal trays were scrambled eggs, bacon, thick toast, oatmeal with brown sugar, and white milk beating cold against the glass. Real milk. Not watered skim, not chalky powder, not a memory. A private behind the serving line looked at their frozen faces and said, "Go on, take a tray." No one moved. The food looked staged, almost theatrical. A cruel joke designed to punish starving women by making them reach for what would be snatched away. Then Lieutenant Collins stepped forward, picked up one of the trays herself, and set it into Elise's hands. "It's yours," she said. "All of it." Elise looked down. The tray was heavy. That was the first thing that frightened her. In Germany, a meal had become something you measured by absence. How little flour, how little fat, how much turnip could be stretched into soup, how long a child could be told there would be more tomorrow. But this tray was heavy enough to make her wrists dip. Marta touched the toast with one finger, as if heat might prove it was real. Inge stared at the bacon and whispered, "They feed enemies this?" No one answered. Elise sat at the long table. She lifted her fork. The eggs were soft, salted, warm. A piece of bacon cracked between her teeth and released a taste so rich that her eyes closed before she could stop them. Then the coffee came. Not roasted barley, not acorns, not chicory boiled until bitterness disguised the lie. Coffee. Private Samuel Reed carried the pot from table to table, filling cups with a kind of awkward gentleness that made the women more uncomfortable than cruelty would have. He pointed to a little bowl. "Sugar?" Elise stared at it. Sugar sat openly on the table, white and loose, as if it were not a treasure that people in Europe hid, traded, dreamed about, and lied for. She nodded once. He added sugar, then cream. The first sip did not taste like victory. It tasted worse than that. It tasted like proof, because if America could give real coffee, milk, bacon, and sugar to enemy prisoners on an ordinary morning, then almost everything Elise had been told had to be questioned, not some of it. Almost everything. 3 weeks passed, and the trick never arrived. Breakfast came every morning. Lunch followed. Dinner followed. Meat appeared so often the women stopped looking startled each time it did. Potatoes were not counted like medicine. Bread was not weighed like ammunition. There were vegetables with color in them, butter with yellow in it, and apples that had not been bruised into surrender. The camp was not kind in the soft way storybooks imagined kindness. There were fences, there were guards, there were rules. The women worked in the laundry, folded sheets, washed uniforms, cleaned offices, and helped prepare vegetables under the eye of the mess sergeant. But the rules were clear. The guards were restrained. The work ended when the work ended, and the food did not disappear. That was the part that kept undoing them. Inge gained weight first. Her cheeks filled out enough that she looked embarrassed by it. Marta began laughing in short bursts. She tried to hide behind her hand. Elise caught herself walking more slowly across the yard because she no longer needed to preserve every ounce of strength. One afternoon, Lieutenant Collins called them into the recreation room. On the table lay several German newspapers taken from captured materials. Their headlines were loud, proud, and familiar. America collapses under hunger. American children wait for bread. Capitalist weakness exposed. Elise had seen pictures like them before. Thin people in lines, empty shelves. Women in coats holding ration cards. She had believed them because everyone around her had believed them, and because belief was safer than doubt. Lieutenant Collins held up one photograph. "This was printed last autumn," she said. "It claims to show starving families in New York." Marta leaned forward. So did Inge. The image showed people standing in a line outside a building, but now Elise saw what she would not have noticed before. Their coats fit. Their shoes were whole. A bakery sign hung beside the door. They did not look like the people in Bremen who scraped frost from broken windows and boiled potato peels twice. Lieutenant Collins turned the photograph over. "This is a line for a holiday charity sale," she said, "not a bread riot." No one spoke. Elise thought of the eggs that morning, the thick porridge, the coffee, the extra slice of toast Sergeant Howard had placed on Marta's tray when he thought no one was watching. Inge muttered, in German, "They made hunger into a weapon." She did not mean the Americans. That evening, Elise lay awake listening to the stove tick in the barracks. The camp fence stood only 30 yards from her window. For months she had believed the wire made this place a prison. Now she wondered if the prison had started much earlier, in schoolrooms, in newspaper offices, in slogans painted on walls, in every speech that told them mercy was weakness, doubt was treason, and the enemy was less than human. The real fence had been built inside their heads. By late March, the Georgia air had softened. Redbuds opened near the camp road. The women worked in shirt sleeves when the sun was high. English words began to slip into their German conversations by accident. Laundry, coffee, thank you, tomorrow. Private Reed taught Marta the names of kitchen tools while they peeled potatoes. She taught him how her mother stretched one apple across an entire pan of strudel. He wrote the method on the back of a ration form, even though Elise doubted he would ever manage dough thin enough to read through. Corporal James Whitaker, whose family farm was outside Savannah, told Inge that his mother canned peaches every summer until the pantry shelves glowed gold. Inge did not believe him. "Whole shelves?" she asked. "Whole shelves," he said, "if we had a good year." She shook her head as if he had described a fairy tale. Easter came with bells from a little church beyond the road. The women were told there would be a special meal after Sunday service, though no one forced them to attend. Some went because they were curious. Some went because hymns, even in another language, sounded less dangerous than marching songs. Afterward, the mess hall smelled of roast chicken, yeast rolls, coffee, and something sweet baking under a blanket of cinnamon. Sergeant Howard stood at the kitchen door, with flour on his sleeves and pride on his face. He was a broad-shouldered man from Alabama who treated the oven like an altar and recipes like military plans. "Ladies," he announced, slowly enough for them to understand, "today you get peach cobbler." The words meant little to most of them. Then he carried out the pan. It was enormous, browned at the edges, the crust cracked open in golden islands, syrup bubbling around sliced peaches that shone orange under the mess hall lights. The smell hit Elise first: sugar, butter, fruit, heat. A smell from a world before air raids, before ration lines, before every appetite became a calculation. Sergeant Howard spooned the cobbler into bowls. The peaches slid through the syrup like pieces of captured sunlight. Marta took the first bowl with both hands. She tasted it, and her face changed, not dramatically, not all at once. The change moved slowly across her features, as if memory had opened a door she had nailed shut years earlier. "My grandmother made plums like this," she whispered in German. Then she began to cry, not loudly, not theatrically, just one hand over her mouth, shoulders trembling, bowl still held tight against her chest. That broke the room. Inge turned away, blinking hard. Another woman, Liesel Brandt, sat down before her knees failed. Elise tasted her own spoonful and felt the fruit collapse warm against her tongue. For a moment she was not in a prisoner camp in Georgia. She was 10 years old in Bremen, standing on a stool beside her aunt, stealing sugared fruit from a bowl before the guests arrived. Her mother was alive. Her father still believed the future could be planned. Nobody had yet taught children to salute hunger as sacrifice. The cobbler was not just dessert. It was evidence that ordinary sweetness had survived somewhere, and the worst part was that the Americans were giving it to them without a speech. No lecture, no demand for gratitude, no grand performance of civilization, just bowls passed down a table to enemy women who had been taught they deserved nothing. Private Reed stood near the coffee urn, watching Marta cry. His own eyes reddened, and he looked quickly at the floor. Sergeant Howard cleared his throat and said, "There is more if anybody wants it. There is more." For some of the women, those 3 words were harder to bear than any insult. After Easter, the camp changed. Not officially. The fences remained, the rules remained, the uniforms remained, but conversations lengthened. The guards began asking the women about cities in Germany, and the women began asking about farms in Iowa, churches in Georgia, Negro soldiers they had seen driving supply trucks, Mexican-American families in Texas, and how a country could contain so many people from so many places without coming apart. The answers were not simple. America was not paradise. The women could see contradictions, hierarchies, prejudice, and poverty. They saw black workers enter by one door and white officers by another. They saw that freedom was not equally distributed, but they also saw argument, movement, choice, a newspaper that criticized its own leaders and was not burned for it. That bewildered Elise almost as much as the food. One night in the recreation room, Inge asked Corporal Whitaker, "How can a country be strong if everyone is allowed to complain?" Whitaker laughed softly. "Ma'am, that is usually how we know something needs fixing." Inge frowned, working through the sentence. Elise listened from the corner with a magazine open in her lap. The words were still difficult, but the idea was harder. A country where complaint was not treason, a government that could be mocked, a flag that did not require fear to stand above people. It sounded unstable. It also sounded alive. Then the letters came. Only 21 women received mail. Elise was one of them. Her older sister, Clara, had written through the Red Cross. The envelope was thin, the paper gray, the handwriting smaller than Elise remembered, as if Clara had tried to fit all of Germany's suffering onto one page. "Dearest Elise, we were told you are alive in America," I cried when the notice came. "Mother says God has hidden you in the enemy's house because perhaps he could not keep you safe in ours." Elise had to stop there. The barracks blurred. She breathed once, twice, and continued. "Bremen is not the city you remember. The center is broken. Our street still stands, but the roof is patched with boards and tar paper. We have potatoes when there are potatoes, turnips when there are not. Little Otto asks what oranges taste like. He is 6 and thinks coffee is something adults invented in stories." Elise looked toward the mess hall window. She had drunk 2 cups of coffee that morning. Clara's letter went on. "Father's cough is worse. There is no real medicine. Mother trades sewing for coal scraps. Do not imagine home as it was. That place is gone. If they send you back, come with strength if you can. There is none left here." Elise folded the letter with great care and slipped it beneath her blanket. Marta had received a letter too. She sat on her bed, staring at it without reading any more. Inge had received nothing. For the first time since arriving, the mess hall felt unbearable. Dinner was chicken stew, biscuits, carrots, and apple pie. Good food, warm food, food given without mockery. Elise ate every bite because waste had become morally impossible, but each swallow carried Clara's words with it. Little Otto asks what oranges taste like. That night, Elise stood outside the barracks until the guard called her back in. Beyond the fence, Georgia insects sang in the dark. Somewhere in the distance, an American radio played dance music too softly to make out. She had believed captivity would be the terrible part. Instead, captivity had fed her while home starved. There was no clean place to put that guilt. On May 8, 1945, the war in Europe ended. The American personnel celebrated carefully around the German women, as if joy itself had to be handled with gloves. Lieutenant Collins gathered them in the yard and told them the news in German. It was over. Germany had surrendered. Some women cried from relief, some from shame. Some stood very still, as if surrender were a language they had never learned to speak. Elise felt nothing at first, then she felt everything. The government she had served was dead. The country she remembered was broken. The lies that had filled her ears since girlhood had collapsed under the weight of breakfast trays, newspaper corrections, peach cobbler, letters from home, and the unbearable kindness of ordinary Americans doing ordinary things. In late May, Lieutenant Collins announced that repatriation would begin as soon as transport was arranged. The women would be processed through Europe and returned to Germany. The room filled with a silence that did not belong to happiness. For weeks, Elise, Marta, Inge, and several others had spoken in whispers after lights out, not about escape, not about rebellion, about staying. The idea felt impossible. They were enemy prisoners, women from a defeated nation. Some had families, some had no houses left, some had nothing but guilt, and a language that had been used to command terrible things. But America, the country they had been taught to despise, had become the first place in years where the future felt like something other than punishment. When Lieutenant Collins finished explaining the return process, Elise stood. Her legs shook. She hated that everyone could see it. "Lieutenant," she said in English, each word chosen carefully. "May I ask a question?" Collins nodded. "If a prisoner does not wish to return at once," Elise swallowed, "if she wishes to work, to learn, to become useful here, is there any way to ask?" The lieutenant's face changed, not anger, surprise. Marta stood beside Elise. Then Inge. Then Liesel. One by one, 12 women rose from their benches. Marta spoke next, her English rough but clear. "The Germany we served was built on things we now know were false. The homes we left may not exist. Here we were enemies, but we were fed. We were guarded but not hated. We were corrected but not humiliated." Inge's voice was smaller. "I am afraid to go back as the person I was. I want to become someone else first. No regulation had prepared Lieutenant Collins for German prisoners, asking not to leave. Sergeant Howard stood near the kitchen door with his arms folded. Private Reed looked at the floor, then up again. Corporal Whitaker removed his cap. Collins did not promise what she could not control. She said only, "I will write the request." Those 5 words became the first plank of a bridge. It was not easy. Nothing after that was easy. There were interviews, papers, sponsors, church committees, background questions, delays, refusals, and nights when Elise believed the whole attempt had been foolish. Some women returned to Germany because mothers needed daughters, brothers needed nurses, and rubble needed hands. Some stayed temporarily, then left. But 9 eventually built lives in America through sponsorships, marriage, work permits, and the slow machinery of post-war mercy. Marta married a baker in Ohio and made strudel that customers lined up to buy. Inge became a translator for a relief agency and spent years helping displaced families read forms written in languages they feared. Liesel worked in a hospital laundry, then trained as an aide. Elise remained in Georgia. 10 years later, she stood in a small kitchen outside Macon, slicing peaches into a glass bowl while her daughter sat at the table, practicing spelling words. The child was 6 years old, the same age Otto had been when he asked what oranges tasted like. Elise's husband, Thomas Reed, came through the back door carrying a sack of flour. He had once been the private who poured coffee into the cups of enemy women and pretended not to notice when they cried. Now he kissed Elise on the cheek and said, "Smells like Easter." Elise looked at the peaches, the butter, the sugar, the dough waiting under a cloth. "No," she said softly, "it smells like the first true thing." Her daughter looked up. "What does that mean, Mama?" Elise considered the question. She could have said it meant America was generous, but that was too simple. She could have said it meant Germany had lied, but that was only the beginning. She could have said it meant food saved her, but food had only opened the door. So she told her daughter the truth in the only way a child could hold it. "Once," Elise said, "I was told that enemies could not be kind. Then my enemies gave me breakfast." The girl frowned. "Were they still enemies after that?" Elise slid the peaches into the baking dish. Not for long. That evening the cobbler came out browned and bubbling, the kitchen windows fogged with heat. Elise served it into bowls. Her daughter asked for more before finishing the first helping, because she had never learned that sweetness might vanish. Elise watched her eat. She thought of the truck road through Georgia, the heavy tray, the sugar bowl on the mess hall table. Marta crying over warm peaches, Clara's thin letter, Lieutenant Collins saying, "I will write the request." A nation can defeat another nation with guns, ships, factories, and armies, but a lie is defeated differently. It is defeated the moment someone you were taught to hate places food in your hands and proves they are human too. Elise looked at the empty bowls, the open windows, the child safe at the table. America had not only beaten the army she once served, it had fed the lie until the lie starved.